This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. I'm Joe Hildebrand and that is The Real Story. And we're also going to bring you the real story behind the appointment of Matt Kean as the government's new climate czar. How long has this been going on for and why did it even happen? Also, the GG's massive $200,000 pay rise. What the F is going on there? And nuclear. Turns out most Australians are in favour of it. Or are they? If you look at the numbers, it tells you a very different story. Plus, the far left and the far right. I've always said that all extremists are the same, and now I have the proof. All that and more coming up. First of all, today, I want to get into what was going to be the big story of the week before a whole bunch of other big stories took over, and that is the appointment of Matt Kean as the new chair of the Climate Change Authority. Now, the government thought, the Albanese government that is, thought that this was a massive coup, that they'd managed to wedge the Libs, they'd managed to nab Matt Kean, who of course is a former New South Wales Treasurer and Energy Minister and the leader of the moderate faction in New South Wales, that they'd been able to nab him, get him out of the New South Wales Parliament, put him in charge of their Climate Change Authority, and bada bing, bada boom, we've got a brand new shiny weapon with which to whack the Libs over their division on climate change. In fact, I think it was a bit more of an own goal. Let's listen to Anthony Albanese announcing the appointment early this week.
Today, Cabinet has agreed to appoint the Honourable Matt Kean as Chair of the Climate Change Authority. As a former New South Wales Treasurer and Minister for Energy and the Environment, Mr Kean is uniquely qualified.
So again, you'd normally think we've got a Lib to say that our policy is better. We've got a Lib to say that nuclear isn't the way to go. This wedges Peter Dutton. It divides his party and is a mess. In fact, it doesn't do anything of the sort. The thing is that Matt Kean is loathed in the Liberal Party. People in the Liberal Party, especially to the right, think that he's already a Labor wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, I've got no problem with Matt Kean, always had a really good relationship with him, but that is what people on the right think. He's already seen as a pariah, as a Judas, as someone who is Liberal in name only, and if you peel it back, probably looks a bit more like a teal. So far from actually wedging the Liberal Party, this just confirms what everyone in the Liberal Party who's left, and we'll get to that later, already thinks. There you go, we told you so. Matt Kean is a turncoat, he's a traitor, and now we've got the proof. So Labor has actually just legitimised the Conservative position on Matt Kean. Far from splitting the Libs, they've confirmed what the Libs actually already think. And yes, back in the day, it might have split the Liberal Party, but guess what? All those moderates who Matt Kean controlled and all those moderates who would have supported or followed Matt Kean's lead on these sorts of issues, guess what? They're gone. And why are they gone? That's right, the Teals. As usual, on every single issue, everything is the fault of the Teals because they've knocked out all the moderates in the federal party that would have actually been swayed by Matt Kean's appointment. And so now the government is left holding what is basically this kind of lame duck. And they're making the same mistake that they made 10 years ago, the last time they were in power, when the Gillard government rolled out a big-name celebrity to spruik its carbon tax. Do you remember these ads?
Finally doing something about climate change.
Yes, when the Labor Party wanted to sell its climate policy last time around, it got the most respected, lauded, well-connected, high-profile, accoladed actress on the global stage, Cate Blanchett, Lady Kate. And again, there was a bit of a problem with this because anyone who respected Cate Blanchett, anyone who listened to Cate Blanchett would know that she's already incredibly outspoken on things like climate change. And so if you like Cate Blanchett, you're already all in. She's not changing any minds. What they should have done is get Shane Warne. And I told them so at the time, nobody listened. And this is the point with Matt Kean. Anyone who likes Matt Kean, I like Matt Kean. Anyone who respects Matt Kean's views, anyone who follows him is going to be persuaded by him. They're already all in on climate change. You're not changing any minds. What you want to get is the people who are hesitant about it, cynical about it, or opposed to it. You want to get them in. So you want to actually surprise people with appointments like these. You want to actually say, hey, bet you didn't know this guy was on our side. And then people go, oh, yeah, all right, I'll pay attention. This is what I call the Coles Jeff Kennett fresh bread solution. See, when Coles was attacked by Jeff Kennett for not selling fresh bread, what did they do? They didn't appoint someone who already said that Coles' bread is the best to be their bread-making checker, czar, whatever you want to call it. No, they said, all right, Jeff, we'll take your word for it. And you are now in charge of our bread quality control. You are now the guy who determines whether our bread is fresh. So you don't get the person who's already saying the bread is fresh to tell you that the bread is fresh. You get the person who doesn't believe it, the last person you'd expect, and you bring them round. And if you bring them round, you're bringing everyone else round as well. So instead of getting, the Christian to preach to the choir, what you want to get is the apostate to be converted. And sadly, that wasn't the only own goal for the Albanese government this week. And again, everyone knows I'm soft on Albo. Everyone knows I love him. So when I'm saying shit's going really badly, trust me, shit is going really, really badly. The other big mistake they made was when one of their MPs introduced a bill to increase the Governor-General's salary by $200,000, by around $500,000 per annum, $500,000 a year. That's not enough. Keep in mind, she's not paying rent. She's already got 2 mansions, one Admiralty House on Sydney Harbour, pretty nice digs, and the other, of course, Yarralumla in Canberra. So rental prices are not going to be a factor. She does not need rent assistance. Yet even so, she's been given a pay rise of $200,000 on top of the existing $500,000 a year she was always going to get. So she'll be pulling in more than $700,000 a year. Now, the reasons for this are ridiculously convoluted. The previous Governor-General was going to have a military pension. This Governor-General was not, although this Governor-General still gets a pension of, I think, 60% of the Chief Justice of the High Court's pension. And this is, of course, someone who rules on the highest legal matters of the land compared to someone whose role is entirely ceremonial, who cuts a few ribbons and, is technically the head of our armed forces. But I don't think she's going to be leading them into battle anytime soon. Point being, this is a terrible, terrible, terrible look at a time when people are really struggling under cost of living pressures. And this week, we had higher than expected inflation, which raises the prospect of another interest rate hike. Yes, that's right, a rise, not a cut, before the end of the year, possibly even August or September. It's now a 50-50 chance the market is betting on for a rate rise in September. So this is absolutely terrifying for anyone with a mortgage. And then at the same time, you've got someone who gets 2 taxpayer-funded mansions absolutely free, getting a pay rise from $500,000 a year to $700,000 a year. Now, this is an absolutely appalling look. The opposition, of course, attacked the government for doing this shortly before it then voted to support the $200,000 a year pay rise. So they're just as bad as anyone else. And of course, we all know why they do it, because when they get the cushy jobs after they retire, they want to make sure that they've got plenty of dosh in their kit as well. But this just could not have come at a worse time for the government. Again, we've got cost of living pressures killing us. We've got mortgage rate rises through the wazoo. We've got the tightest rental market in a generation, and someone with 2 giant mansions, staff to look after their every need, says, no, $500,000 a year, sorry, not quite enough. That's not going to cover my parking. I'd like to have $700,000 a year. Thank you very much. This is absolutely appalling. And whoever was involved in it, whether it was the GG herself or the government, should have seen this. There should have been alarm bells all over it. And instead, very nice young MP, Patrick Gorman, I'm sorry, mate, they really hung him out to dry on this one, whether with an invisible gun to his head or not, has to put this bill through Parliament and say, would you mind just quickly signing this? Sorry, she starts next week. Anyone for whom this didn't raise the biggest possible alarm bells has no business being a politician. They have no business being a public representative, because the public absolutely despise it. This was on the front page of every single newspaper, every single major metropolitan newspaper in the country. And it didn't have to be. It was a terrible story for the government. It was an absolute terrible look for the GG. And of course, it reinforces this message to people doing it incredibly tough that the elites, meanwhile, the people at the top of the tree, the people at the top of the pile, they're just yakking it up. And not only are they yakking it up on their giant taxpayer-funded salaries, they're actually asking for more. An awful, awful, awful own goal in a week of own goals for the Albanese government. And then we get to the icing on the cake. Ball number 3 in the hat-trick, third runner in the trifecta, the incredible work of Senator Fatima Payman from WA. She just got elected in 2022 with the Albanese government. She was put on the Senate ticket in WA in a winnable position. That meant that once the government got elected, she was almost certain to get elected as well. And indeed, she duly was. And how has she rewarded the Australian Labor Party for this immense privilege? She has committed the ultimate Labor sin. She has committed the ultimate Labor act of treachery, and that is she has crossed the floor in the Senate to vote with the Greens on a ridiculous, pointless, symbolic motion about, you guessed it, Palestine, of course. Now, firstly, you need to know what the Labor Party stance is on crossing the floor, and that is it is a sackable offence. You can be dismissed from the Labor Party, expelled, excommunicado, for crossing the floor. It almost never happens. The last time it happened was almost 20 years ago, and the last time it happened in government was almost 4 decades ago. And that's because people who do it know that they are basically walking to their deaths. They are walking the plank, and it would take an extraordinary act for them to be allowed to remain in the party. Sometimes there are extraordinary circumstances, not in this case. So just to recap, there was a vote in the Senate brought by the Greens about how much they supported Palestine. Labor tried to alter it to say that, we also support a 2-state solution. But no, of course, the Greens knocked that on the head because they're a bunch of crazy extremists, and we'll get to that later too. And instead of just going along with the Labor Party line, as every single MP and senator always does, Fatima Payman decided that she was going to cross the floor and vote with the Greens, vote with Lydia Thorpe on this absolutely pointless bill. Now, this bill, this motion in the Senate, was never going to get carried. So it was never even going to get up, even with Fatima Payman's vote. So it had no impact on the vote itself. And even if the vote had gotten up, it would have had absolutely no impact whatsoever on the war between Israel and Palestine. It's not like Benjamin Netanyahu's going, I wonder how the Australian Senate voted. Oh, dear, they voted against me. Oh, well, better stop. I'm afraid that's not how international relations works. And so this was a complete virtue signalling exercise purely for the senator's own vanity, or perhaps just so she could sleep well at night. And yet so many other Labor MPs over the years have made the simplest of sacrifices for the sake of party unity and for the sake, in the case of this week, of not kicking a government when it's down. As we've just recounted, the government has more than enough problems without one of its own senators deliberately adding to them. But instead of just saying, right, okay, what can I do to help the Anthony Albanese Labor government in its darkest hour? She crossed the floor and kicked it in the nuts. And of course, amid all this, you've still got the climate wars raging. As if the government didn't have enough problems on its plate, it's got Peter Dutton's nuclear power plan that it still just doesn't seem to know quite what to do about. It seems that appointing Matt Kean didn't make the issue go away, so it's unclear what else they've got up their sleeve. And some troubling results in a new poll that was commissioned over the last few days, which found that a majority of Australians support nuclear energy. Shock horror. 6 in 10 Australians say that they support nuclear energy as part of the nation's energy mix. That's a survey of 923 randomly selected people conducted over the weekend. That was just after, of course, Peter Dutton announced his plan to build 7 nuclear power plants and outlined the 7 locations, but not how much each or any of them would cost or how much power they would produce. Even so, 60% of voters said nuclear power has a place in Australia's future energy mix. Bit of a worry, huh? Well, maybe not, because guess what? When you ask people if they believe nuclear power has a place in Australia's future energy mix, yes, 60% said, oh, absolutely, for sure, yep, absolutely support it. And only 40% said no. But when they were asked, would you be comfortable with a nuclear reactor being built in your state or region, 53% said no. So suddenly, a majority, and a pretty solid majority of Australians, are not so keen on nuclear when the prospect is raised of it being built not just in their backyard, but in their state. And this gets back to what I've been saying on this show since day dot, which is that everyone is going to say, oh, yes, of course, I'm not a Luddite, I'm not a knuckle drag, I've come out of the caves, of course I understand that nuclear now is safe and reliable, and of course I support it. It's a really common sense way to get to net zero, if the economics stacks up, of course. But as soon as people are asked, do you want it in your area, do you want it in your region, do you even want it in your state, suddenly that number flips and you've got a majority saying, actually, no, I don't support. What, here? Oh, no. It's not the nuclear I oppose, of course. It's just the parking. And it's the exact same thing, of course, people say about housing. Oh, yes, we support more housing, more high-density housing. Oh, absolutely, the nation needs it. Oh, it's terrible. What, young people these days can't get anywhere to live. Oh, no, a building in my street? Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, no, of course I support more housing, but it's the parking. It's just the parking. Don't even ask about the mosque. It's very tolerant. But the parking, it's always a worry. And finally, on the real story, I want to give you the real story behind pretty much everything you need to know about politics, and that is that all extremists are the same. Now, I often say that all good governments are the same because if people with half a brain in their heads and half a heart in their chests are confronted with the same problems, they'll usually come up with the same or similar solutions because there's obviously a solution that makes sense and is the best for the most people. And in just that way, all ideologues who are out on the far-flung fringes of politics often end up gravitating towards the same crazy ideas. Yes, the far left and the far right are exactly the same. But don't just take my word for it, because we have real-life, real-time examples unfolding before our very eyes, and by gosh, it's glorious to behold. The first is a call from a OneNation MP. Yes, that's right, Pauline Hanson's OneNation. A OneNation MP in South Australia to light up the city of Adelaide in the colours of Palestine. Yes, that's right. OneNation South Australia has joined the Palestinian cause. It has actually joined the Greens, OneNation and the Greens, on a unity ticket to call on the government, led by the mighty Peter Malinauskas, to light up Adelaide to show solidarity with Palestine. Now, again, just as Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm sure, is keeping a close eye on Senate votes to see whether he should launch his latest incursion into Gaza, I'm sure he's watching his real-time live stream of the Adelaide cityscape, and what a beautiful city it is, to see whether or not it gets lit up in the colours of the Palestinian flag, to see whether or not he's going to launch his next bombing raid. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that OneNation and the Greens are literally on a unity ticket in South Australia, both calling for, voting for, supporting the exact same thing. But it's not just the Jews who bring the far right and the far left together in a beautiful hand-holding display of unity. There's another person who does it as well. And he's a person I know, well, reasonably well. In fact, he's a person who I've had round to my house for dinner. And that person is, of course, Julian Assange. Now, I better tell you this story because it's a bloody good one, but I've met Julian Assange. I knew him. I was in on Julian Assange before he was cool. You know what I mean? I knew this guy before WikiLeaks was even a thing. In fact, a friend of mine helped bankroll WikiLeaks. I think he also helped bankroll quite a few members of Julian Assange's family as well. But let me tell you the story. Many, many years ago, when I was in Melbourne, a bloke who shall remain nameless because he thinks he's being hunted by the European intelligence authorities. But he was in a motorcycle accident. He made some poor decisions, and one of them was to try to ride cross-country to catch up with a bunch of other motorcyclists that he was riding along with. And he hit an obstacle, and then his head hit an obstacle, and he got an acquired brain injury. Now, I only knew him after he acquired this brain injury, and the story is just phenomenal. Basically, he was immediately unconscious. He was immediately placed in a coma, and they thought he'd never wake up. They thought he's either going to die or he'll just end up being a vegetable, or, there's no hope for him. So they basically just threw a blanket over him and sat him in front of the TV. And then a few weeks later, he woke up and he started talking again, and he started talking in an American accent because he'd basically learnt English again from the TV. So his accent was almost the exact same proportion of American as American content on the television of the 1990s. Amazing stuff. Anyway, so he's in all sorts. He's got brain injuries, got physical injuries, and he's legally blind, but hey, it's never stopped anyone in politics before. And this guy gets this massive payout from the Victorian state government. So the state government had this thing called the Transport Accident Commission, which was a no-fault scheme that covered all road accidents. It's actually what the NDIS was initially based on, was initially supposed to replicate. So the idea was that if you were disabled, if you were injured in any accident on Victorian roads, you're entitled to a payout, you're entitled to financial compensation, no matter whose fault it was. If it was your fault or if it was someone else's, it didn't matter. And this was seen as a very sort of humane way. And then, of course, people were looking at this saying, hang on a minute, how is it fair that if I have an accident on the road, the state gives me money, but if I have an accident anywhere else, I get nothing? And this was how the NDIS started to germinate. And said, well, why don't we have a national statutory scheme, no-fault scheme, so that anyone who ends up disabled is entitled to certain payments. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back to Julian Assange. So this guy, my friend, got a brain injury. I can't stress this enough because this is why this happens the way it does. And he starts obviously getting involved in all sorts of weird conspiracy theories, or these really weird sort of fads that come along. Anything that's advertised on late night television, he seems to have absolutely no resistance to and buying it, because after all, the television was his teacher. So he suddenly accumulates all this crap. His financial advisor, which comes along with the payout, is just tearing his hair out. He's always fighting with him and saying, why did you buy this from, Demtel? And anyway, so he's always looking for ways to throw his money away needlessly. And he's always got people desperately trying to stop him. And he falls in with this crowd in Melbourne on the sort of university scene. And one of them is this young chap called Julian Assange, who spins him this tale and says, you won't believe what I'm going to do. I'm going to start this incredible online data dump system where people can just take all these top secret documents from the CIA and all these secret intelligence organizations, and they can just put them there anonymously so they won't get caught. And then I'll release them to the world and expose all these conspiracies and expose all these secrets and the evil imperialism of America and the war machine. And of course, for my mate, who is just right up this like a rat up a drain pipe, this just sends all his synapses firing. He's like, just stop right now. Where do I sign? Where do I sign? How much do you want? Just take it, take it, take it. And the next thing you know, he's throwing all this money at Julian Assange. God knows where it's going. And me and my other mate, Darren, hear about this because of course, he's telling us, oh, you won't believe this. They're starting this new WikiLeaks thing and it's going to change the world, Barney. Darren's also called Barney. And so we think, well, this guy's ripping our mate off. We've got to stop this. It's taking him for a ride. And so we're living together in Sydney at the time, me and Darren, not me and Julian Assange. And my mate is in Sydney at the time. And I said, we want to meet this guy, Julian Assange, who's taken all your money. We want to meet him. He goes, oh, great, Barney. Great, Johnny. He calls me Johnny, just like he calls Darren Barney. Like I said, he's brain damaged. And so we invite Julian Assange over to our house for dinner. I cook an amazing spaghetti bolognese. So I'm whipping that up. And my friend comes over. Everyone's sitting down. Everyone's had a had a bit to drink, and Julian Assange rocks up without a bottle of wine. Or even a cask. I'm not fussy. Nothing. Empty-handed. He rocks up to a dinner. He knew it was dinner. He rocks up empty-handed. That's the first black mark against his name. We knew he was sus then. And then he comes in, we quiz him about all this stuff, and we just think he's kind of a bit weird, and, it's just, we asked him to explain whatever it is he's doing to see if it checks out. We had no idea about it. We didn't even think the internet was going to last, but whatever. So he's telling us all this stuff, and we're going, oh, yeah, right, whatever. And then he hitches a ride home, gets in a cab with some other friends of ours who were there. He jumps out of the cab, won't let the cab take him to where he's staying because he doesn't want anyone to know, of course, because it's all top secret because he's on the run from the government, and jumps out somewhere near Sydney University, I think it was, runs out into the night. None of us ever saw him again. Meanwhile, me and Darren are sitting back out probably onto our fourth bottle of wine, none of which were provided by Julian Assange. We're going, Matty, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is crazy. This will never take off. WikiLeaks, as if that's ever going to happen. This guy's crazy. Can't be right about everything. Anyway, Julian Assange has an incredible ability to unite the crazy left and the crazy right. And again, don't take my word for it. But after he finally negotiated his freedom and he's on his way back to Australia, this was greeted by people right across the world with joy and jubilation, including two celebratory tweets. One said this: "A good man, finally free. The tide is turning." Another said this: "Julian Assange will finally be free. While great news, this has been over a decade of his life wasted by US overreach. Journalism is not a crime. Pursuing Assange was anti-democratic, anti-press freedom, and the charges should have been dropped." So there you go, two separate tweets celebrating the release of Julian Assange and saying that finally the tide is turning, finally freedom is being fought for once more. And who do you think they were from? I'll tell you. The first one was from Tucker Carlson, of course, the top-rating former Fox News host who believes in the great replacement theory. And the second was from Adam Bandt, the leader of the Australian Greens. Gosh, it's nice when you bring people together. That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for listening to The Real Story. Thanks so much to everyone who's given us heaps of positive feedback. Love you all. And if you love what you hear, leave a rating and review. And if you want us to cover anything or you got any comments, reach out via email, therealstory@novapodcasts.com.au, or you can drop me a DM on Instagram. My handle is @Joe_Hildebrand. Or, of course, if you want to catch up with more of what I've got to say, I've got columns in the Daily Telegraph on Monday and the Saturday Daily Telegraph on, you guessed it, Saturday. Take care and I'll see you next week.